Hello students, welcome to engineering assignments. In engineering assignments, we are going to study a subject called as disaster management, in which we will be discussing about the measures for disaster risk reduction. So the main measures for disaster risk reduction is prevention, mitigation and preparedness. So these all terms you have already studied from the first module, but I am once again revising about it. See, prevention. Prevention, we know that it is a measure for preventing a disaster from happening. And mitigation means that is a step to reduce the severity or intensity of the disaster. Next one is preparedness. What do you mean by preparedness? There are some types of disasters, say natural disaster. You can't prevent it from happening, but you can reduce its effect if you are properly prepared for it. So in this video, we will be studying detail about this prevention, mitigation and all. So first we are going to deal with disaster prevention. Prevention is actually a proactive process which is done before the disaster strikes. So prevention is basically to reduce the factor of the death, the loss as well as the damage of the building and all. So disaster prevention is defined as those activities taken to prevent a natural phenomena or potential hazard from having harmful effect on either people or the economic assets. Broadly, the disaster prevention refers to the measure taken to eliminate the root cause that makes a people vulnerable to the disaster. In simple words, we can say that it is the activity and measures to avoid the effect of the disaster on the people and their property. Next is the basis of the disaster prevention. For disaster prevention to be successful, a prior planning must be done. Planning of prevention hinges on two issues. So these two issues are, one is hazard identification, another one is vulnerability assessment. Hazard identification is basically identifying the actual threat facing a community. If you identify the hazard, then you can understand when will this disaster happen, how it will happen, and to which community it will be more affected. So this planning has to be done first. Second one is vulnerability assessment. Vulnerability assessment is evaluating the risk and the capacity of the community to handle the consequences of the disaster. Here, the basic understanding of the weakness of the community is done, and it is necessary to provide the strength to face such disaster. And one more thing is that if these issues are put in order of the priority, the emergency managers are the people who make plans for prevention of the disaster. So they can determine the appropriate prevention strategy also. While the natural hazard cannot be prevented, but the man-made disasters such as hazard associated with industries, technology failure and pollution can be prevented. Although in the literature sometimes we may use prevention and mitigation synonymously, but there is conceptual difference between the two terminologies. Prevention means that we have to take measures from preventing a disaster to happen, and mitigation is the step to reduce the intensity or severity of the disaster. Okay, and prevention has more to do with prohibiting man-made disaster such as chemical accidents, household fires, etc., and which can be caused by human activities or error or insufficient precautionary actions. However, mitigation and preparedness are considered as a key measures of risk reduction for natural disaster. Next, we are going to study disaster mitigation. Disaster mitigation, by definition, it refers to lessening or limitation of adverse impact of the hazard and related disaster. In simple words, we can say that it is used to measure the severity or intensity of a disaster. The adverse impact of the hazard often cannot be prevented fully. As I told you earlier that the natural disaster you can't prevent it from happening, but you can lessen the effect or severity of that natural disaster by using various strategies and actions. So, I am putting it into point, but their scale or severity can be sustainably lessened by the various strategies and actions. Mitigation measures encompasses engineering technique and hazard resistant construction as well as improved environmental policies and public awareness. For example, a place is much vulnerable to earthquake. If the building has to be constructed on that particular area, then this building should be earthquake resistant building. The engineers will be using cross bracing, shear walls, shock absorbers and all. So in this way, the building can withstand the earthquake. This is an example of mitigation measure encompassing engineering technique. Okay. Next is primary objective of disaster mitigation, and there are two folds. First one, hazard likelihood reduction. Second one, risk consequences reduction. The first one is hazard likelihood reduction. So here the objective is only appropriate for a few natural hazards, as it is not possible to reduce the occurrence of many hazards. So I already told you the natural hazard is a type of hazard you cannot prevent from happening, but you can reduce its severity. Okay. So for example, the likelihood of the flood occurrence can be reduced by mitigation measures such as using a sea defense wall, etc. So you can understand that we can just reduce its severity, but you can't prevent from happening it. Next one, risk consequences reduction. This is a reduction in the impact of hazard via a reduction in exposure and or vulnerability. It involves ensuring the population, structures and other systems are able to withstand such an event with a few negative consequences as possible. Here, we are ensuring that the structure measures which we have developed to prevent the disaster can withstand the disaster. For example, the construction of erosion resistant seawalls in Quetta and Volta region of Ghana. So, in reducing both hazard likelihood and risk consequences, the main aim or the primary aim is to decrease the death and injury of the population. And second aim is, of course, is to decrease the economic loss of public and private sector. Finally, we are going to discuss about types of disaster mitigation measures. Types of disaster mitigation measure is being categorized into two. One is structural mitigation measure, another one is non-structural mitigation measures. The structural mitigation measure refers to any physical construction to reduce or avoid the possible impact of hazard, which includes engineering measures and construction of hazard resistant and protective structures and infrastructures. For example, if you are building a dam to get protection from the flood, if you are building a earthquake resistant building to get protection from the earthquake, these all comes under structural mitigation measures. Next one is non-structural mitigation measures. This refers to policies, awareness, knowledge development, public commitment and methods and operating practices, including participatory mechanism and the provision of information which can reduce the risk related impact. So non-structural measures means it is some policies through trainings. We are also providing some rehearsals, how to cope up the situation. These all comes under non-structural measures. Okay, that's all about this mitigation and prevention. In the next video, we'll be dealing with preparedness. Thank you students. Thank you for watching my video.